All right, so that was very interesting. Unfortunately, I did miss some of it because I had to be on the phone. That had to do some other things that were very critical today. But I think I was right. I think it wasn't any of the magical. Well, it was some a little bit of the magical new technologies that were touted as like the next battery stuff, right? But I guess they're less magical now that Elon has laid them out in front of us, which is why he's a great magician that shows you these things that seem crazy at first, but then once he says them and he lays them out in front of you, then you're like, oh, okay, it's no big deal. Yes, it totally makes sense. Like some of these things were like the bigger size. I'm gonna go through them here. I wrote them down like bigger size, right? I think it was 4580. Is that what we came to? Um, that totally makes sense. There's no magic there. Bigger battery means less shells or casing material, which means you can have a more densely packed battery, right? And that's going to do a bunch of things. It's going to allow you to put more battery in the same space, right? And it's going to, just by having the virtue of having a bigger battery, is going to allow you to have higher performance, right? So you can have a longer range vehicle and you have higher performance standards coming out of that, right? Because I mean, a bigger battery can put out more power, right? So that right off the top is nothing big. That's not revolutionary, really, to make a bigger battery and stuff. But then he talked about the tabless design, and the tabless design, it's a thing that I hadn't heard until just a few days ago, maybe like a week ago. I hadn't really been paying attention, and then finally read a thing on like the tablets design, and I'm like, oh, that totally makes sense. I wrote in here that it's basically a round, cylindrical pouch cell. And for those of you who don't know about batteries, pouch cells are like the lipos, right? Lipos are pouch cells, and those are notorious for putting out a ton of power. I mean, they go up to 100 Cs, 100 times their capacity they're able to deliver in power. And the reason they're able to do that is because they are kind of like they're flat sheets where the cathode, the separator, and the anode are there, and then each one of those has a tab. So it's not tabless design, but it's a multi-tab design, right? So every layer that goes around, it's one little battery, and they're put together, right? And each one has a tab that is going. So you have a much shorter distance for the current or the electrons to travel to the final terminal of the battery. And so that is one of the reasons. I mean, there's a couple others. The chemistry composition of the battery is one, but the mechanical one is that short tabs, terminal to cathode or battery material, right, distance. And so that is the reason why those have such high performance when it comes out to power. And so that's essentially what he's building. He's building like a lipo cell, right? That it's a pouch cell, and then he's just flipping it around like a taco. And tabless design, it's not really tabless. It's like the whole thing is a big giant tab, right? And so that what that will allow him to do is have much more power output, which will allow him to have a smaller battery that can still deliver full power to these cars. And the cooling, right? And the cooling performance, thermal performance will increase on those batteries, which will allow him, again, to remove that energy or power from the cell fast. But also, key here is to be able to replenish that energy back into the battery, which means that he's going to be able to increase the supercharging standards, right? So even though you have a smaller battery, maybe not, like nearing the 100 kilowatt hours, maybe like a 50 kilowatt hour battery, but you'll be able to still charge that, right, at 250, 300 kilowatts, maybe, right? So shortening the charging time, right? And so I think that is a key thing here, because moving forward, like I said, people don't need 600 miles of range. They need fast charging. You need to be able to charge in 5 minutes and then gain another 150, 200 miles, and then keep going, right? And then most of the charging happens at home, so who cares? It's just for people that are on the go. Another one of the other things that he talked was the dry electrode manufacturing. And that is one of those things that to me seem like, okay, whatever. What is that? What does it mean? Yes, they acquired that technology from Maxwell. But what can they do? I didn't foresee, or I didn't understand what a huge impact that would have in the manufacturing of the cells, right? He put it in perspective there when he put those giant ovens that it takes to dry the, those materials that they have to coat the films with, right? And so, and also not just the volume, right? Volumetrically, the size of this machinery that it takes to be able to do this one process, but also the time that it takes. Apparently, it takes a long time for that, and so that will help him basically build more batteries in a smaller footprint, right? Just minimize the footprint that it takes, which he put it also in perspective and said in the space of a factory that would put out 150 gigawatts, now he can put out a terawatt, right? Terawatt hour. So that is one of those technologies that seemed like it was, kind of fancy, kind of like, magical. And now that he kind of explained it and he showed in video form how he's just basically crushed all this material, which is like graphite, most of it, right? With some other materials in there. He just crushes it, makes it into a fine powder, and then somehow they roll it on, they crush it and roll it onto that film, but without needing a lot of solvents, I guess, right? That they're wet and they don't need to dry. So then that minimizes the time of manufacturing, and then so that's one of those technologies that it's going to introduce, right? That I think was magical, but now that we see it. Now he also did talk about the cathode materials and the metals and stuff, but that is around the time that I had to step out of this conversation. I stopped paying attention because I had to deal with something else. So I don't really know. I guess I'm going to have to leave that for you guys to tell me, or maybe go and watch it again, what that was all about, where he was talking about how I did catch a little bit where he talked a little bit about the fact that lithium is everywhere. It's a salt, right? In salt form. And he said that Nevada has enough to do most of what we need here.
So it's important to note that there is a massive amount of lithium on Earth. In fact, there's enough lithium in the United States to convert the entire United States fleet to electric.
And so that the lithium is not really a problem. It's the other metals. It's like the cobalt, the nickel, the copper, and the aluminum and stuff, right? And some of those are rarer, materials, metals, and some of them are less rare, like aluminum and copper. Those, they are fairly available. They're kind of expensive. The prices go up and down and stuff, and they could be an issue too. But they're not as scarce as some of the rare metals, like cobalt and stuff. And so I don't think he did mention about how they're planning on taking cobalt, unless that was the part that I was missing, right? But you guys tell me in the comments here if you mentioned that. Let's talk about another thing. He talked about the module redesign, right? And that is a thing that I mentioned before. It was one of those things that he had talked about, how he was going to remove the modular design that he had been using up until now to manufacture the batteries, right? And we're kind of seeing already trend going towards that. Less modules in the Model 3, right? If you know anything about the Tesla batteries, in the Model S, they have 16 modules that are, about 12 inches by 30 inches or 27 inches, something like that. They're about 50 pounds. And there's 16 of those modules. And those are all in the battery, and they're separated by all these structures and technologies, like, walls and stuff, so that if one catches fire, the other one, doesn't extend to the other 15 modules. All that, I think, is going away, as it did with the Model 3. The Model 3 now is a simplified version of that, and it's 4 long modules. So they have more batteries in there. Well, they have less cells, but more battery, essentially, right? Each one of those is about 20, it's like 18 to 20 kilowatt hours per module. So these become much bigger modules. And I think he now, in today's conversation, he's talking about changing that even further and making the battery a structural part of the vehicle. At that point, then there's less wasted space. There's stuff that the battery's part of the vehicle. It's not a thing that you bolt into the vehicle. It's like actual part of the vehicle, the walls, what I believe in this case would be the floor, right? And it would add rigidity because this is a very dense part. I mean, batteries are very dense. They have a lot of material, right? It weighs, typical Tesla battery weighs about 800 pounds, right? And then you add all the structures that go into encasing it, and you're talking about like 1,200 pounds on a Model S. I think it's a little bit less for the Model 3s because it's a smaller battery and it's a smaller car. But now basically less of that is going to be structure to house the battery, and more of it is going to become just car material, right? Car mass. And I think that is a very interesting design, or very interesting, philosophy going forward. Because why do you need to be wasteful when it comes, right? I mean, that will help in many aspects. It will make the space for a bigger battery to be installed in the car, and I guess structurally it's going to help the car too, because it's going to be stiffer, right? And stiffer is good. You want to have a structure that's stiff, and then you can engineer how you put crumple zones in there and all this stuff. So it's going to increase safety and all this other stuff, which is pretty good. And all of those things added up to about 50% reduction in costs, which that is a good thing, right? If we are, I don't know, do we actually know? I don't know if we actually know the price that Tesla pays per kilowatt hour for battery. But I think I've read things where it's like about $100 a kilowatt hour. So if he said something like 57% or some reduction, which means what? Are we somewhere around, or are they gonna be, once this is all implemented, around $50 a kilowatt hour? Now that's a huge improvement in the cost of the battery production, right? And so if that is the thing here, then that's it. They did it. They're going to do it. Except for the one part that this is not implemented right now. There's a lot of this is testing. This is a roadmap, right? He explained that it's a roadmap. And I think that's where a lot of there's going to be disappointment, I think, when on the analyst and people that are following this that thought that he was going to announce something that, okay, now we're using it, you can order it now, kind of thing. I don't think so. I think this is going to take some years to implement every single one of these things, and it's a roadmap, and which is kind of disappointing. But at the same time, it's not, because he's laying it all out. There's no magic. Once again, there's no magic, and even the magical technologies, once you look further into them, you're like, oh, there's no magic here. It's just a lot of hard work, a lot of good engineering, and a lot of good execution from his part and his teams. What was missing from the conversation? Apparently vehicle to grid does not make sense to Elon. And I guess it's true. When you really think about it, we're not there yet. It is cool to have a giant battery connected to your house in an emergency situation, right? But like he said, you do need to disconnect from the grid. You can't just use grid tie inverters, right? It's not that hard to do, but it's non-standard. So none of our homes in the U.S. and any of the states are ready to do this. It's not like, oh, you just change something in the car and then put a different charger with a different connector. It's more than that. You have to install inverters. You have to install transfer switches, basically, right? And this is weird because this is all things that he's already doing when he's installing a power wall. This is all the stuff that is needed. So it's not impossible. It's not even hard. It's just I don't think he sees a compelling case for having that right now. And I don't know if I agree with that. But I mean, I don't know, right? I think he sees it as like you need to have a separate battery for your house and a separate battery for your car, because it's bound to happen. When you need that battery to power your house, you're also going to need to go to the store or take off to do something. And then you're going to have to choose. You're going to have to be like, well, do I keep the car plugged in so they can power the house? Or, so you don't, never want to be in that situation where you have to choose between those two. And so maybe he's right. I don't know. You know, tell me in the comments if you think he's right about that. Also, part of the conversation was missing lithium iron phosphate. They kind of touched a little bit on this Q&A thing, but he really didn't talk how that fits into the roadmap, right? As far as we know, lithium iron phosphate has lower energy dense, and so those batteries are bigger and they're heavier, so that means you can't achieve the same level of performance that they're going. It's also not cheaper, I think, because it's made in less units or is produced in less quantities. It's higher right now. Like, if you can't buy cheaper lithium iron phosphate batteries, right? And also because they're lithium iron phosphate tends to be really good at like energy storage, right? So they have long cycle life, right? It's for, you know, it's not rare to see 3, 4, 5, 6,000 cycles ratings on these batteries. And they're also ultra safe, so they're really safe to put in your home. They will not catch fire. They will vent at the very most, right? They're not as reactive. They're not as flammable as lithium coal oxide and lithium manganese, all those other chemistries that are, you know, leading the way in energy density and power density and all those aspects of batteries. So he really didn't talk about how that fits. I heard today was saying that those make sense for the low to medium range applications, right? So vehicles that don't need to have hundreds and hundreds of miles of range, maybe stuff that, which I don't know what they're thinking. I mean, their cars are kind of general use. They kind of need to have at least 200-300 miles, right? I think that's the sweet spot that we have right now until the infrastructure gets a whole lot better and we have superchargers everywhere. Also, the big one that was missing from the conversation was the 1 million mile battery. He didn't talk about the 1 million mile battery, right? All this stuff was about reducing cost, about improving manufacturing processes so it becomes cheaper, right? And becomes the footprint smaller, so there's less complex, I guess. But none of this talked about cycle life. And so how is he going to reach to the 1 million mile battery? He didn't talk, at least from when I was paying attention, right? If I'm wrong, post it in the comments there, because I didn't hear about how the 1 million mile is going to be achieved. So is that a thing that's still for the future? Is that no longer the case? Is that a thing that maybe he doesn't think is achievable? I don't know. Like, it's weird to see. Also, part of the conversation here missing, of course, this is the thing that I called it a long time, and every time that I'm ever asked about this, is the supercaps. Supercaps don't play a role in this thing. They don't need them. We don't need them. They are useful for the thing that they do, but whatever the thing that they do, we don't need. We need batteries. We need energy storage devices that have different characteristics than supercaps, right? And so they didn't touch in here. I mean, I could be wrong, and then they could be part of the future, you know, roadmap or whatever. But that's right now. They didn't even mention them. Also, another thing that I saw mentioned there is the goal to be at 400 watt hours per kilogram. So that is true. I think the raw cells in the Tesla Model S are about 125 watt hours per kilogram, and then the Model 3, I think they're like nearing like 160. I think you correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm just spitting all these figures out of my just memory, and my memory is not as good as it used to be. So it turns out I'm old. Again, thank you for all your support. We'll see you guys on the next video. Bye. Whoa, 130. I hope so. I hope you're right. So is he playing another soundless intro? Oh my God, look at that. Those are the images of the West Coast. By the way, if you guys are not in the US, if you guys are not on the West Coast, this is what our skies have looked like this past month. This is pretty incredible. We're seeing images of San Francisco.